Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. To understand how important critical race theory is to the Marxist Democrat Party, you only need to look at the story playing out in Southlake School District, Carroll ISD, my district, in the heart of conservative Texas, just outside of Dallas. It's not the place you would imagine a debate about CRT would necessarily occur, but that's exactly what's happening. Critical race theory, aka institutionalized Marxist racism, is the ideology that teaches people to view America as systemically racist, a racist country where every law, every policy, every institution was created to oppress people of color. It's a lie, obviously, but it's essential that progressives teach your children this philosophy. Why? Because leftists must convince your child that the American system is evil and unsalvageable because they intend to radically change it and move the country towards socialism and communism. And CRT is the worldview that is critical to achieving this goal. And at the center of CRT is the belief that equality must be destroyed for equity. Equity is obtained through discrimination. So in order to obtain the absolute same outcomes for everyone, some people must be treated unfairly. Equality is an enemy of CRT. It's anti-equity. This is where you get the whole white privilege phrase, among other things. And what's more, CRT proponents argue that equality is impossible because the country wasn't created with equality in mind. And as of such, as we said, every single system and measure is flawed. Their solution is to destroy the unfair and inequitable republic in favor of a system that apportions equal amounts of equity, no matter what sort of discrimination had to occur to facilitate it. CRT has conquered nearly every institution in America already. This mental virus has had no trouble spreading through all of our federal agencies. It's even in places you wouldn't expect, like our military, and already fully embedded in policy in corporate America. But CRT finally encountered something, and parents, particularly the Southlake School District, that it couldn't defeat. Parents. So let me back up for just a moment and tell you the story. See, when the Carroll ISD attempted to implement, that's the school board, attempted to implement critical race theory, parents responded instantly. Parents were not up in my town for tackling theoretical racism with a bigoted Marxist worldview that teaches actual racism to their kids. And the parents quickly organized a PAC called Southlake Families, and it took off. When these parents began showing up in greater numbers at school board meetings, there was a shock. The school board didn't see it coming. They were just going to implement a CRT plan presented in a 34-page cultural competence action plan. I've written about it before, called CCAP. And they tried to do it, even reportedly violating Texas's Open Meetings Act to circumvent parents to keep them out of the loop before one family finally had enough and filed suit. It was a ridiculous plan and a blueprint for an fake anti-racist revolution, and how the district's schools conducted their businesses, and the school board's behavior in implementing was called into legal question. Now, the plan is insanely radical. It would have been over the top even at Cal Berkeley. So, for example, everything from curriculum to discipline policies to teacher training to hiring decisions, everything must be filtered through the prism of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are pleasant-sounding words that actually mean CRT. Race must be considered first. Part of the plan required a director of equity and inclusion, that position. They would be hired to oversee implementation of this program, including the goal to, quote, embed diversity and inclusion curriculum initiatives for students as an enrollment to graduation, a process in all grades, end quote. One of the things called for also was the creation of a secretive council to track students', quote, microaggressions, consciously or subconsciously done, end quote, and it would be attached to their permanent record. Kids would have to learn the anti-historical revisionist propaganda like the 1619 Project, which, by the way, was so bad it was debunked by even other communist college professors who were so embarrassed by the inaccuracies in 1619 Project that they were actually scared it was going to harm their cause. That's just the top of the iceberg of what CRT activists wanted to present as education in our district. And this is kind of par for the course everywhere else. It was nothing less than this plan to ingrain woke, social justice, racial politics in public schools and in my town, and in my district, Carroll ISD. The overwhelming sense from the plan is that it would have created a regime to hector students about everything and snitch on them for anything and then hold them accountable for everything, like your pronouns, using the pronoun you want to use and that science follows. That would be counted as one. But again, Southlake parents weren't having it. So they formed a PAC, Southlake Families PAC, and they fought back and they put forward new school board candidates. Long story short, the parents fearlessly stood their ground, and roundly. The first municipal election last year, it was like plus 30 victory. Just last month, Andrew Yeager won a school board seat, plus 60 was the victory. These are parents, Democrat and Republican, voting against this stuff. And a lot of this is led by minority families who are whitewashed out of existence by CRT proponents. No, they defeated these school board candidates that were pushing CRT. It was a huge victory against critical race theory, and it became, as I wrote in Newsweek, the red print for how to defeat Marxist ideology in every town across America. And so the Southlake School, Carroll ISD, became a real problem for the Marxist progressive left, because now school districts and parents everywhere, they're modeling their PACs and their outreach and activism on what happened in Southlake. Critical race theory is critical to Marxist plans to change America. And so Southlake provided for a model how to win this in municipal elections against this ideology. And so all across America, parents took notice. They began replicating the success, and it is working. You saw the massive pushback by parents in Loudoun County, Virginia, and the election of Republican Glenn Youngkin. Democrats were voting for him, and he ran on these very issues effectively. Parents are awake to critical race theory. School boards are on notice. That means the left has to make an example out of some folks, including Carroll ISD and the parents in Southlake. So the woke empire strikes back. And that's exactly what's happening with the help of legacy media, right? So first, NBC began last year this investigative series on my town. They sent their news trucks to film in our subdivisions. They recorded parents walking into school board meetings and into city halls to vote, our city hall to vote. It was really interesting that after Carroll ISD School Board, they got some bad press. They got in trouble because they violated the Texas Open Meetings Act, and that's a law violation. They hired pricey PR firm SunWest PR. At taxpayer expense, of course, even though the district has an in-house PR specialist. And coincidentally, right after SunWest PR got involved, very coincidentally, I'm sure, NBC got involved. NBC's goal is to portray Southlake, Texas as this highly racist, homophobic, and transphobic area, and that any parent, especially, by the way, the minority parents that have been actually leading the fight on this, that anybody who speaks out against CRT is a racist, or as one CRT advocate said to one of the Cuban families here, white adjacent, whatever that means. They also wanted to pretend that critical race theory was never going to be implemented in Southlake School District to begin with. The parents were just making it up because, as you know, that's what the Marxist left always does. They gaslight you. And it was no different in Carroll ISD. But now we are seeing how the progressive left plans on taking their revenge to the next level. They're weaponizing the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, their Civil Rights Division, to get in the way. Watch.
What we know so far is that the Office of Civil Rights, this is the civil rights investigation arm of the U.S. Department of Education, this is a federal probe, has opened these 3 investigations, and they're looking at allegations and complaints that deal with racial harassment and harassment around gender and sexuality. And of course, we have been reporting on incidents in this school over the last several months.
Yeah, they've been reporting for the last several months, but what's funny is that the NBC hasn't even been able to verify whether or not some of the people that they're using as their spokespeople essentially for CRT issues on this even live and pay tax in the district, which not all do. I know, journalism. Legacy media is doing the bidding of the Democrat Party and teachers unions. And they have their sights set on Southlake to make an example out of anyone who pushes back on CRT. How insanely rare is it for the Department of Education in the first place to take on complaints? But yet they're looking at new complaints of racism and harassment around gender and sexuality from a district in Texas. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, right? Watch.
We spoke to some experts who put this in context for us. Look, normally when these complaints come into this office, this federal office, only about 5 to 10% of them go from a complaint to a real investigation. And this one school system is looking at 3. So that is significant. And the school has now put out a statement to us, and they say that they are fully cooperating with this process and diligently pulling all documents requested. But, you know, it's important to know that this is going to be a process. Usually these take north of 14 months for the full process to play out. And then after that, if the government determines that there have been violations of Title IX in this school district, they are going to not only force the school district to make changes, but ultimately end up monitoring them potentially for years.
And by the way, that reporter is an absolute propagandist. I have video footage of her not wanting to talk to other families that don't represent what she wants to represent about CRT propaganda. NBC is a hackneyed propaganda outlet. They are not a news entity. Keep that in mind. And these people who have come to, they're not even from this area, they're not even from this town, come here and push hate and division. Now, here's what's weird. I mean, you have an election. Parents determine that they don't want this racism taught as education in their schools. And then so all of these activists decide they're going to circumvent that and they're going to just bring in the government to put the boot of full government power right down on your free and your fair election. And parental sovereignty, too. The DOE rarely ever takes on complaints like this, but suddenly they're taking on 3 complaints. Again, coincidence? Of course not, because we know that Attorney General Merrick Garland's DOJ has instructed the FBI to keep files on uppity parents who speak up at school board meetings. And now the Department of Education is being weaponized. They want to overturn the will of parents in Southlake, Texas, and force critical race theory into public schools, like it or not. And if it takes weaponizing the DOE, Marxists will do it, because everybody needs to pay attention to this, because this is the playbook that is coming to every last school district in the United States that pushes back on critical race theory. They're going to come after parents by weaponizing the FBI, and then they're going to come after the districts and force it in there anyway by weaponizing the Department of Education, so they can force CRT and radical ideologies into the schools against the will of the people and against the parents, who, by the way, defeated all of that in an overwhelming electoral defeat. So, how are they doing this? They're taking undisclosed complaints of racism and bullying to the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, so they can initiate an investigation with the goal of enacting federal monitoring of the school district. So they're going to start a fire so they can call in the fire department. My own Congresswoman, Beth Van Dyne, can't even get an answer from DOE as to what exactly Carroll ISD's civil rights violations even are. They refuse to share that information. So the DOE, they just said, we are investigating. We don't even know what these accusations are, if they are even real. Welcome to the American Stasi, where you're being investigated for a crime, but you have no idea what for. All we know, well, we kind of know what it is. Parents stood up to critical race theory in Southlake, Texas, and they won not once, not twice, but 3 times overwhelmingly. And now they have to be punished by Marxists. And to be clear, if there was any kind of civil rights violation found, why is it not a state and local issue? Why is it immediately escalated to the federal level? And parents, I'm a taxpayer in this district. There are parents here with kids and pay taxes into this district, and they're not given any answers about this at all. No, this is from the same people who wanted to implement a program where students snitch on each other for every last microaggression and promote cancel culture, which is what happens when CRT is embraced. And now they're doing this. What they want, the CCAP thing, is not any answer to any problem, real or not. In any case, the Southlake Families PAC is pushing back and demanding information on this investigation by the Department of Education. So today, Southlake Families attorneys are submitting multiple Freedom of Information requests to the federal government. Parents want to know if any of us have been targeted and tagged by the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI. They want to know if there's been any communications from local citizens to the DOJ, as was threatened multiple times on social media. Also, attorneys for the PAC want to know if there's any link between the DOJ, FBI, and DOE with regards to 3 investigations of the Department of Education launched against CISD. A number of Texas lawmakers are demanding answers from the DOE, except Senator John Cornyn, who I'm told thinks the reason to request for information about the aggressive attack on parents' rights is, quote, too aggressive. I really hope this information that I'm hearing is incorrect. I've reached out to Senator Cornyn's office twice for insight, but the senator, who is always very eager to get on my nationally syndicated radio show, is suddenly MIA on this issue. Just a reminder to all politicians, regardless of your party, any lawmaker hesitant to back parents against institutionalized Marxist racism, aka CRT, should really pay attention to the landslide victories we've had at the ballot box. Because I promise you, that same momentum will absolutely propel you out of office if you stand against us and our kids. The fact that these investigations come after extreme left-wing activists made direct threats to our city and schools immediately upon their loss in the November school board election necessitates further inquiry into potential political retaliation and abuse of power by our school board, by the district, citizens, and the Biden administration. So parents, get ready. I'm not trying to scare you, but I do want to be honest. Marxists never sleep. Their lidless eyes never blink. And as the Southlake School District is proving, Carroll ISD, after pushing back successfully against CRT, the woke empire is striking back. But we know how that series ends. Now, to do so, they have to find charges of racism and LGBTQ XYZ bullying so that then they can provide a solution to it. CRT! And then they're going to use the power of the federal government to cram it down the throats of parents and their children, to circumvent the will of the people and the school boards they've elected. See, if the left can't infiltrate your school board, they'll go around it, and they'll use an authoritarian federal government to implement it. The battle for our kids' minds and hearts is about to go next level, and it's at stake. I'm not being dramatic. It's nothing less than the soul and future of America. And for the left to win, they have to deconstruct the republic and indoctrinate your kids against our system of government. Parents, we're all that's standing in the Marxist way, and they're trying to back us down. But we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our kids and our kids' sake, our future, their future. And we better pray that we win. Coming up, MSNBC has been banned from the courtroom. More bad news from the propagandists at NBC. They've been banned from the Rittenhouse trial. We've got the latest details with Second Amendment attorney Stephen Halbrook. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee develops their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus they learned as military members. They're founded and operated by veterans. Black Rifle Coffee also knows what a quality cup of coffee means to active duty troops who are away from home for the holidays. And as we've been telling you every day this week and last week and the week before that, they're committed to supporting all who serve. So with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. Just last year alone, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to soldiers overseas, LEO, firefighters, and more, including workers in the pandemic response. This November, every time you purchase some coffee, a bag of their limited edition holiday roast will be sent to service members overseas for Christmas morning delivery. So visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. Check out the freshest coffee in America. That's blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to get 20% off coffee, apparel, gear, and your first month of the coffee club. So we're still awaiting a verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. We're on day 3 of deliberations now. And earlier today, it came out that an MSNBC producer, there are apparently 2 separate incidents of this, was allegedly caught because they ran a red light and got a ticket following the jury bus in an effort to take pictures and try to get someone for an interview after the verdict was rendered. The judge has now banned all MSNBC/NBC reporters, not just from the trial, from the courthouse. Here he is addressing the situation just hours ago. Watch.
I have instructed that no one from MSNBC News will be permitted in this building for the duration of this trial. This is a very serious matter, and I don't know what the ultimate truth of it is, but absolutely it would go without much thinking that someone who is following the jury bus, that is it's extremely serious matter, and will be referred to the proper authorities for further action.
Not surprising coming from MSNBC. There's also apparently another reporter who did the same, and she deleted all of her social media accounts. And this on the heels after we hear people were filming jurors getting on the bus, and someone else uploaded a video of themselves saying that they were going to dox the jurors. And remember, the jury is not sequestered. Good heavens. Here to break down the latest from day 3, Second Amendment attorney Stephen Halbrook. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. So good to see you. I just got to get your reaction to this because I keep seeing like Brian Stelter from CNN was saying, oh, well, this is normal. He was just following the jury bus to, arrange, maybe get some names and arrange some interviews. That's not how any of this works ever, right?
No, Dana, good to see you. Look, there's been one thing after another. Every day there's been some kind of fiasco or surprise that shouldn't happen. I mean, what we know now, you've got all these so-called demonstrators outside the courthouse making all kinds of racket. The jury is not in a soundproof room. They can hear the threats. I mean, you can go back to when this trial started, the voir dire, when the jurors were being questioned. There were jurors who expressed apprehension about rioting and things that could come from whatever their verdict's going to be. You've got that. You've got threats coming in to Judge Schroeder. This whole idea of jury intimidation, what happened today with MSNBC, they would have gladly leaked out any pictures of jurors or whatever that they could get. So anyway, this is day 3 of deliberations. What does it mean that they haven't decided the case? It could mean, hopefully, that they're just trying to get it right. They want to go through all the evidence, of which there's a great deal, to cross every T's, dot every I's, and make sure if they're going to acquit that they have a substantial basis for acquittal. Or it could be that they can't reach a verdict. We might end up with a hung jury. Or it could be they're working out a compromise verdict. It could be, as happens sometimes, they'll convict somebody of one thing and in exchange in the jury room for acquittal on other things, or failure to reach a verdict on other things. So we just don't know what's going on back there.
I know, and this is, and it doesn't, I think it hasn't helped concerns either from those watching or from, I think, defense too, because you had the motion for mistrial with prejudice and then without prejudice filed yesterday. And then I hear today, this was shortly after I was finished with my radio program, I heard today that apparently the jurors had requested additional images, I guess stills or whatever they could get from that parking lot, I guess, and that was in relation to the Joseph Rosenbaum incident of that evening. What does that indicate to you? You're an attorney, you've been in this position, you're waiting for a verdict. What does that say to you in your experience? Where are they at, you think?
Well, the evidence was overwhelmingly in favor of Rittenhouse self-defense claim. The prosecution is trying to induce a smokescreen that this FBI drone that took pictures that you can't really decipher what was going on somehow is the key, because if they can establish provocation, the defenses go away pretty much, because if Rittenhouse provoked the original attack by Rosenbaum, and the allegation by the prosecutors is that there was a couple there who he pointed his rifle at, then that's provocation. Now, what's the basis of that? The prosecution apparently took a still photo showing a reflection that made it look like it could be a rifle pointing in a certain direction, and they didn't show the entire video. And it turns out, of course, that Rittenhouse is right-handed. He held the rifle throughout the whole event in his right hand, and this would have been held in the left hand. And what happens after that? Rosenbaum twice threatens to kill him, and then starts chasing him, comes at him, tries to grab the barrel of the gun. I mean, the state's medical examiner said there was soot consistent with gunpowder burns on Rosenbaum's hands. So the prosecution is, trying to pull out the last straws to try to win this case. It's a political trial. There's no question about that. I mean, without virtually any investigation, they made these charges, and they pursued it using all means necessary. I mean, every day during the trial, just about, the judge had to chew out the prosecution. I mean, one of the most outrageous instances was when the chief prosecutor tried to comment on the defendant's silence, which invokes the Fifth Amendment problem. And that gave rise to a motion for mistrial. We've got 3 of them now.
Yeah, 3 of them now. And I know there's a lot of question as to how this even progressed to the point of a trial in the first place. I mean, I know there's a lot of discussion about the probable cause, and I just don't know how with an open and shut self-defense case. And is that why you think that the prosecution seemed, for just no lack of better way to describe it, just clownish? Is that why they were so over the top and ridiculous with some of this, because they had to fill the time with some kind of theater? Because I'm not quite sure what case they have.
Well, look, Rittenhouse was in a place where he had a right to be. He was putting out fires. That's what led to the original threats against him by Rosenbaum and being chased by Rosenbaum. You see him with his fire extinguisher, him and another person putting out one of those large bins that they set on fire, and then they pursue him.
That's what made Rosenbaum angry.
Exactly. So you've got one thing after another, one piece of evidence self-defense. If you fear imminent death or serious bodily injury, you reasonably do so, then you can use deadly force to defend yourself. Look, Wisconsin law is very good on this issue. It's very straightforward. What we have here is an abuse by the prosecution to try to throw the monkey wrench in the engine and make up one narrative after another as to why the self-defense didn't exist. Like, you shouldn't have come there. You were scrubbing walls to get rid of graffiti with your AR-15. I mean, how many times did he mention AR-15? It's countless. So this is a political prosecution, and we know what's going to happen if there's an acquittal. If he's found guilty, nobody's going to riot, by the way. We know that. If there's an acquittal, there'll be riots.
Yeah, if there's of course, there might even be riots even if there is a guilty verdict, Stephen. You never know. I mean, everybody riots now.
Always, you don't want to, pass up any opportunities for a good riot.
There you have it. I wanted to ask you, too, talking to our friend Stephen Halbrook, Second Amendment attorney, your thoughts on the dismissal of the weapons charge. I'm actually surprised that didn't happen a lot sooner. I thought that they would try to stretch, it was a curfew and he was a minor and out after curfew with a long gun, that they would try to get something with that. But I mean, it was 16-inch, regular, completely not an NFA item. It was just a regular semi-auto, commonly owned firearm. That seemed to disappoint a lot of people who couldn't be prevailed upon to remember the fact that you had the adults who were there who were armed were illegally so.
Yeah, look, in Wisconsin, it's a misdemeanor to be under 18 and to possess a firearm. However, there's a number of exceptions to that. And there were a couple of the exceptions where one of them referred to if you're under 16, and the way the statute was written, it was convoluted, so that it would have been best, actually, had the judge just thrown out that charge as a matter of law based on vagueness. There's no way they could show that he was not under one of those exemptions. I think they wanted to keep it in the case as long as possible, just to keep, the judge can tell the jury, you can disregard that count of the complaint now, but it's still there. And how long did it take him to admit that it was a lawful rifle, that it was not like an NFA firearm, a short barrel rifle? After the judge told him, well, look, you can just measure it. And I think defense counsel must have had, I know he had a measuring tape, but that was for another purpose. But I mean, that count should have been long gone. And of course, the being out after the curfew was declared, that was dismissed voluntarily by the prosecution. They didn't prosecute anybody else on that, did they? I mean, all these people out there riot.
Yeah, and a quick question on that: why is it that there isn't a charge for Groskowitz carrying? He was carrying concealed, except when he was running down the street with his finger on the trigger, brandishing at everybody or flagging everybody. Why didn't he get any kind of weapons charge? I'm like mystified by that.
Well, he didn't get any charge. Of course, he had an expired license. He testified, and I've seen an allegation that he's a convicted felon. I haven't verified that.
It was a burglary charge that was expunged.
Yeah. So, but if you look at the way this has been handled, they had a search warrant to get into his cell phone, and they never executed that search warrant. They wanted to know about everybody else and what everybody else was doing or saying or whatever. Rittenhouse's phone was searched. He voluntarily allowed him to do it. But with Groskowitz, I mean, this guy walks on water. He's their star witness. But of course, when it came around to testifying, he spoke fairly truthfully about the fact that after he put his hands up, then he put them back down. He grabbed his pistol and he was pointing it right at Kyle's face when Kyle pulled the trigger. So, that must have been devastating for the prosecution.
You could almost hear the air go out of the courtroom on that. And that was at one point when the, ADA Krause that's when he face palmed at that point. We're going to watch it. Last quick question. When do you think there's going to be a verdict? I mean, I know that's kind of like asking you to look at your crystal ball, but, if you were to guess.
Yeah. I mean, look, Dana, I don't know, and you don't know, and nobody knows. The longer this goes on, what frequently happens, there's a hung jury. What they really need to do is to decide it. We don't want the judge to give the Allen charge. That's where usually it happens like on a Thursday. He gives them that this charge that he tells the persons in the minority on the jury, like, you really need to reach a verdict. You don't want to have to come back over the weekend, do you? And so defense attorneys hate the Allen charge. It basically puts pressure on the jury just to, by all means, reach a verdict. I mean, if there's reasonable doubt, those persons need to hold out for acquittal. And once again, I I think the evidence overwhelmingly shows acquittal. We don't know what jurors going to do, and we shall see. Que sera, sera, whatever.
There you go. Stephen Halbrook, always appreciate your insight, my friend. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to see you. Yeah, you take care.
You too. Coming up, GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel joins me to discuss the latest pivot in messaging coming from the White House and that war on parents coming from the DOJ, FBI, and now the Department of Education. More after this. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers are still abysmal and inflation is still skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that we can't pay for. You need to be proactive and protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and legacy precious metals can help. Washington still keeps printing money to pay for their outrageous bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation. As the dollar gets weaker, gold is stronger. My folks at Legacy Precious Metals, they're the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a whole team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their investor's guide full of useful information at legacypminvestments.com. Welcome back. So just about everything costs more these days. Gas, used cars, everything for Thanksgiving dinner. Even, and I know this is going to just upset so many people in Southern Missouri who do the actual good cranberry salad. My sliced cranberries that I put on my bed of lettuce, even that has increased by like 14 cents a can. I monitor that. Oh, so what's the White House reaction to all of this? Well, listen for yourself.
So I would just note this is not, sometimes it's, I'm not saying you're doing this, but sometimes people compare this to the Recovery Act of 2009. It is not that. We are not in the middle of a historic economic crisis right now. This is an opportunity.
Oh, it's not a crisis. It's an opportunity, right? You paying double for your Thanksgiving dinner and us having the most expensive Thanksgiving dinner in American history is an opportunity for what we don't know. What a spin. Joining me now to react is RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, always good to see you. Happy early Thanksgiving. It's an opportunity for whom?
I don't know who's getting the opportunity here. I think that they need to go back to the drawing board. It's great to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. Families weren't together last Thanksgiving because of the pandemic, and now it's going to cost families more to be together. The gas. Many shelves are empty at the grocery stores. I know in Michigan, it's much worse than I've seen in other parts of the country where I live. And people are really being impacted on this tax on working Americans, which is inflation.
Yeah, in which it's interesting because the White House at first kept saying that, oh, this is, we're not it's anything would be just transitionary. It's just not, this is going to be a temporary thing. It's not going to be permanent. Now it looks like, at least for so long as probably Joe Biden's in the White House, it will be permanent. But the White House is finally pivoting kind of their messaging. But it's still, there's still so much behind the ball. I don't know if that's even going to help them because of that stuff like this. I mean, what is behind their decision to finally acknowledge the economic reality here, you think?
I think they've been forced to acknowledge it. I mean, the Biden administration is always behind the American people. They refuse to acknowledge the failure in Afghanistan. They refuse to acknowledge that parents have a right to say what's going on in their kids' school. And then now they're refusing to acknowledge inflation. This is being forced upon them. The only way they acknowledge things is if it's forced upon them. And every single media outlet, every single financial, expert is calling out that we are in an inflationary period. We have a supply chain issue. We have a labor shortage. This is not just manufactured either by anything other than Biden's policies. He paid people to stay out of the workforce, so employers are having to pay people more to work, and those costs are being put onto the consumer. And at the same time, that labor shortage is causing a supply chain issue. So people are paying more to get those goods because there's less of them.
I was reading, actually it was a video of him, he was giving some remarks and he was talking about oil and gas companies, and then we hear from the White House that he's raising the issue of whether or not oil and gas companies are being shady and why everything is so expensive, almost intimating that they're just overcharging people, and it has nothing to do with the fact that he's cut private leasing on federal lands or the Canadian oil from Keystone XL, or now he's targeting Line 5 up in the Great Lakes, which is hundreds of thousands of jobs. He asks OPEC to put out more, release some more from their reserves. They raise prices, and then they decide from our own reserves to release oil. But that's like if we're in, from what I understand, I mean, that's like if we're in a crunch, if we're in a world war or something like that, and we need those reserves. That's not supposed to be a substitute for producing it yourself. And then he gets out there and suggests that it's actually the oil and gas company's fault as a consequence of his policies. Is he making these policies? It just is so clueless. Ronna, your reaction?
I mean, he never takes credit for anything he does. He never takes responsibility. Everything's a blame game. And the American people are just smarter than that. They know that he cut energy production. They know that he cut the Keystone pipeline. They know that he's going to cut Line 5. This is absolutely because of his policies. But what's so upsetting, Dana, is people are really hurting. And it's so sad to watch Washington and these bureaucrats turn a blind eye to families who are struggling right now to put gas in their car, to pay for groceries. This increase is really hurting families on fixed incomes. And the Democrats choose to ignore it. And it's insulting to families who are looking for relief. And you know how you get relief? Let's look at Republican governors. Of the top 20 states that have added jobs, 17 are run by Republican governors. Of the top 10 states with the lowest unemployment rates, run by Republican governors. They kept their economies open, they kept their kids in school, and they understood the true science behind COVID.
Yeah, that's true. We're talking with Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, you mentioned a little bit earlier, the DOJ, FBI calling parents domestic terrorists, weaponizing these agencies to go after parents who speak out against CRT, and Republicans have been all over this. I know Congressman Jim Jordan was demanding answers, asking Merrick Garland this specifically. Well, now we also have the Department of Education through their Civil Rights Division looking at schools like Carroll ISD, actually in my town, looking at school districts that were successful in getting pro-CRT advocates off the school board. Well, now they're saying that there's some civil rights violations. They're not telling anyone, including any congressional members, what those violations are, and they want to come in and they want to set some standards. So basically go around parents when they're successful at the ballot box and use the DOE to overstep these elections and implement CRT anyway. What can be done? What are some solutions? What can Republicans do to kind of really protect the sovereignty of these municipal elections and parents from these weaponized Biden agencies?
Well, we saw it. We saw it 2 weeks ago. I mean, it wasn't just Youngkin and New Jersey and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court race. There were school board races across the country that Republicans were winning as they're ousting these extreme Democrats. A whole group of parents have been awakened because we were on Zoom with our kids. I was one of them. We got to see what was happening in the classroom. And then the Democrat leaders had the audacity to say to us, you don't have a say in your kids' education, as we were the ones struggling with our kids, as they weren't with their friends, as they weren't getting the learning they deserved, as Democrats kept them from getting the education they deserved because they cared more about the unions than the kids. So right now, they do not have any say in telling parents, we don't have a voice in our kids' education. And parents spoke up in Virginia, and they're going to be speaking up in this election across the country, from school board to Senate.
I'm so happy to see this, and this really is something to behold, this huge movement. It kind of, I think it's bigger than what the Tea Party did back in 2010, the shellacking that they gave Democrats in the House. Huge. Last question for you, talking to Ronna McDaniel, chairwoman of the RNC. This CBS poll, I almost said ABC, it was a CBS poll, and it was showing, it was a survey of registered voters, 51 to 41 in favor of the GOP. Hasn't been this high since 1981. And I think when I was looking at some of the crosstabs about it, it really kind of showcased, the GOP is the working man's party. I wanted to get your reaction to this because it seems like the Republican Party has a huge coalition and so much potential and opportunity. I just wanted to get your response to that because that poll was amazing.
It was. It was amazing. I think it does reflect what I'm seeing across the country. I also don't want to get comfortable because we got to work hard, and the Democrats are going to do
True.
everything they can to win. So nobody feel comfortable. We've got to work hard. But we did have a huge coalition in the Youngkin race. Suburban moms came out. We saw Youngkin win with 11% of the Hispanic vote. We saw the rural vote come out. If we continue to keep putting coalitions like that together across the country, we're going to win everywhere in 2022.
Oh, that's great.
But because we're running on common sense issues, parents should have a say in the classroom. We should be fighting against inflation. We shouldn't have open borders. We shouldn't have drugs coming across our border with 100,000 deaths last year. The list goes on and on and on. And the American people are embracing the common sense policies of the Republican Party.
There you are, Ronna McDaniel. Always appreciate your strong voice out there. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Happy Thanksgiving.
Of course. Happy Thanksgiving. So folks, coming up, you've heard of the Fortune 500, but have you heard of the Frightened 500? We'll tell you all about that next. Stay with us. The First TV was named after the First Amendment of our Constitution, the right to speak out about what we believe and what we hold dear, passions and pursuits. It's the most fundamental thing about being an American. So in choosing a name for this new network, we had no idea how important and timely a decision that would be. Freedom of speech is more important and more vital than it has ever been. And you need to join us. Activate. Become part of that fight. Visit thefirst.com/support or the First TV app and learn how you can join the fight by supporting The First. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover, and that's home title fraud. Law enforcement calls it one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially. That's why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when somebody forges their signature on documents stating that you sold your home to them, and then they can take out loans against your home and leave you with the payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove that you didn't actually commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anybody, from a cyber thief or renter or relative trying to horn in on your title, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and enter code radio for 30 free days of protection. One thing you might have noticed is the stunning silence from Fortune 500 CEOs on those vax mandates, which they're instituting due to pressure from an authoritarian federal government, although they were granted kind of like a reprieve, according to the Fifth Circuit. But it's still like they're still going full steam ahead with this. I don't understand why. We've researched, and with almost zero exception, these Fortune 500 companies and their CEOs, they act like more like the Frightened 500. They're afraid to run afoul of this authoritarian federal government, forcing people that would like to anyway, put injections in their body against their will. Now, remember when Biden said that he wouldn't mandate the vax? Well, in a way, he actually wasn't lying, because the feds they were just going to lean on the private sector to do it. So in other words, encourage your place of work to coerce you by threatening your livelihood. It's so shameful. But this is a shameful administration, and they've been using these tactics from day one. What's truly shocking is Fortune 500 CEOs and companies have gone along with it. Not one that we can find is like actually standing up and punching back against these mandates. In fact, some companies like United Airlines, they mandated it for their employees even before the federal mandates were even proposed. The OSHA rule, the CFR was even discussed. During the height of the pandemic, pilots and attendants and nurses and EMTs and longshoremen, delivery people, on and on, they all dutifully came to work. They assumed the risk for everybody before any vaccine was available. These were frontline workers, and they clocked in every day before even people understood this virus. Fortune 500 leaders, they came to work via Zoom, like most of corporate leadership in this country. And frontline workers faithfully served those companies at risk to themselves. So why won't any CEO of one of these big Fortune 500 companies maybe take a risk themselves once and stand up, and like for some of these same employees now, the ones who so dutifully served them when they could Zoom it in? Yet company after company, they're callously kicking loyal employees to the curb. And America's corporate leaders, they can't hide behind OSHA's mandates either. Remember, you still had that Fifth Circuit thing. They froze both the enforcement and implementation after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals put a stay on that mandate, with the idea that they're arguing that it's unconstitutional. So Fortune 500 CEOs, if they're mandating that their employees are vaccinated and then to threaten their livelihoods if they won't comply, that's on you, not on the employees. And by the way, if there's a rare adverse reaction in an employee that any of these CEOs strong-armed into taking it, will the Fortune 500 company actually accept the liability? Because real courage would be if just one of those big CEOs said no, right? We're not going to do it. If just one CEO took that unpopular and brave stand and spoke up for their employees who are vax hesitant, or maybe they have natural immunity for whatever reason, stand up for your employees' bodily autonomy and stand against medical segregation and ruining your employees' livelihoods. Speak out against an overreaching federal government establishing a disturbing precedent that I don't think it doesn't align with anybody's beliefs, nor the Constitution. If anybody had the power and means to press the case for people's bodily autonomy right now, it's that corporate class, right? You're in a position to take the most risk while your employees are not. And so far, we haven't been able to find one who has been able to stand, right? Nobody's been able to take this fight to the court of public opinion. So you got to be willing to take unpopular stands. Don't let your employees take your hit for you. That does it for us tonight, folks. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.